Welcome back, everyone, to the Darkest Theory podcast. I am Subtle, alongside ScrapBrain.
Hey, what's going on, everybody?
So we have a good episode ahead, basically just talking about the actual live implementation of all of the mid-chapter patch changes. So we've kind of already talked in the past a little bit about all of the modifications they did to the original release of the PTB, but now we've had a few days to kind of get used to what it feels like in live games once those changes have been put in. All of the slowdown changes, some survivor perk changes, as well as some healing and medkit changes, all that kind of stuff. But we'll kind of start with the Bloodweb, or the auto Bloodweb change, which was something that I think everyone was asking for a pretty long time. Blood points had become a kind of cumbersome to get through and spend, particularly when rank reset happened and people would save blood points for new chapter releases, all that kind of stuff. But it felt pretty good on the PTB, but they really kind of worked out the kinks, increased the speed, and it goes very quickly. It's a really nice feature, being able to either click on a specific node and it will kind of just do that fold line straight to there, or just pressing the center and just kind of letting it take over. It goes much faster than it did on the PTB. Scrap, if you want to give your thoughts on the auto blood web feature.
Yeah, it's nice to have these changes in hand to be able to play around with them, as opposed to just reading text on what they're planning on doing. And oh my god, is the blood web feature nice? What I said before, where when this change becomes live, I'll use it for early blood webs, and when blood webs are like mostly filled and I've gotten what I want from them, then I might use the auto blood web feature. That's exactly true, because you can really manipulate how the entity takes things from the blood web. But in particular, on those like early levels where you just one click, it takes everything. It's so nice. And even on those later ones, when you just click on the node that you want and it will take everything in the line up to that, that's incredibly, like, it's so much faster. It's one click as opposed to, three or four. It's really nice. I like it a lot. It's a great change.
Yeah, it feels really good in those early blood webs, like you said, just being able to kind of tear through ones that you aren't even really given a lot of choices, or there's no real decision making in them. I know that they've said for characters that haven't been prestiged yet, you'll have to still do all of the manual clicking through, which will be a little bit annoying, I guess, when there's new chapter releases. I wonder if they'll decide to change that moving forward, because I know some people had some stuff to say about that, just because it doesn't seem all that necessary for players who have prestiged plenty of characters before.
Yeah, I would think
But
if you have prestiged a character.
right. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I think would be a nice change. As long as you prestige somewhere before, you get the hang of the blood web, you know what it's about. So if you want to auto blood web, just go for it. Also, not having to hold and having the option to just click to fill in the node is great. And yeah, it's been great. I enjoyed what they had on the PTB, and this is an even better version than what we were shown initially, and it saves so much time and doesn't feel nearly as daunting getting through all of the blood points. So
Yeah, for
good
sure.
job. Yeah. Good job, behavior.
Yeah.
But I guess kind of transitioning to just more of the core gameplay, we'll kind of jump in and talk about the slowdown perk sort of changes, right? So pain resonance was changed, overcharge and call of brine, those were both changed. And obviously we had eruption that was changed when skull merchant, kind of ahead of these three perks, were changed at the beginning of the chapter, rather than the mid chapter. Pain res becoming the 4 token once you've hooked someone for the first time on a scourge hook. It regresses by 25% immediately. And then call of brine and overcharge pretty much work the exact same way, except they had both of their numbers tuned down immensely. Any like kind of initial thoughts on how they handled those perks and how you felt going against and playing with those perks?
Yeah, I mean, playing with pain res still feels great. Kind of like what we were talking about last week when I was talking about my demo build. You can um, hook survivors on non-scourge hooks to kind of wait on procking your pain resonance, until you're sure that there's a generator that has 25% or more, to get full value from it. It feels very like free form. You have a lot of control over when you get your regression, even if it's limited in the timing. Uh, I haven't played with Eruption, Call of Brine, um, or what's the other one?
Overcharge. Yeah.
Overcharge. Yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
played with any of those. They're not my chosen forms of regression. Um, and playing against, I've been seeing quite a bit of pain res, which I think is fine. I don't have any problem going against that. One thing that we talked about on a much more previous episode is I'm still seeing a lot of Call of Brine Overcharge and Eruption like together, and I think that that's simply because a lot of people, play once a week and aren't familiar with the changes and just that was on their bar and that's what they're still running. I mean, none of those perks are very problematic anymore, so I don't have any problem going against that. But I think it's just an issue like we talked about before, where people aren't really enfranchised in the game and don't realize that the perks got nerfed a lot.
Yeah, I think it's probably a mixture of people not knowing that there was the change, and then also I think some people maybe just stubborn, trying to see if they can still make those perks work to an extent after the nerfs. In those matches, I know we had when we were playing, we had a few matches, particularly against like Skull Merchant and some other killers, where they would try to make the Call of Brine overcharge stuff still work and hold gens, and it felt way more doable. Like the way the math worked out, like they couldn't just ping pong between the gens as easily without us steadily gaining on them. Like, sure, it might have been boring and it takes a little while, but it feels like in the end it doesn't get that, like it doesn't create the old stalemate that it was creating prior. So I think that that's a really good change. Like, killers can try to bore survivors to death with that, I guess. Like, that's still a tactic, or maybe just like try to catch them off guard, right? One slip up could the whole game could go to shit or something like that. But it doesn't feel like survivors are helpless against that anymore. It feels like it's very manageable. You just do the two furthest apart gens from in the 3 gen, and you eventually get through it.
Yeah, don't worry, Skull Merchant and Night players. You're still making survivors' lives fucking miserable,
Yeah.
but it's a little less miserable now.
Yeah, there's a light at the end of the tunnel at least while we're like suffering the entire time.
Yeah.
Um and I guess like where do you kind of see killers sort of turning to? I think like at some point they'll kind of, even for the people who are trying to be a little bit stubborn and stick to the old like 3 gen regression perks, I think we'll probably realize that for a large majority of the killers that's probably not the best play. Where do you kind of see them maybe turning to instead?
I think Painrez is still very strong. Pop may start to come back into the meta. Otz apparently put out a video, I haven't seen it, where he's talking about Pop Painrez being the new meta. Maybe that's the case, I don't know. I think that, you know, Deadlock is a perfectly strong form of gen slowdown, even if it's not regression. Um, yeah, I think Painrez and Pop and Deadlock are probably like the premier slowdowns right now as far as gen slowdown. With the changes to self heal speeds, and it still affects altruistic also, but I still think that Sloppy is a very strong healing slowdown and is perfectly reasonable. A killer like Pig or Pinhead, who already have built-in slowdown into their base kit, can gain benefit from any of these forms of slowdown just as well as any other killers, but it really augments what they already have going on with their killer power.
Yeah, and I think those killers and others like them that have that sort of like passive other mechanics that the survivors have to worry about, where they can't just sit on gens. I think it's possible that those killers could still see more value from stuff like Call of Brine, just because it allows the gens to keep regressing for longer. Since, with Pig, you have to go get your trap or address the box or chain hunts and all that kind of stuff. The chaos there could allow gens to regress for a little longer. I feel like Overcharge is probably going to go back to more of like the niche, like doctor difficult skill check type of builds with
Yeah,
like Huntress Lullaby. I feel like it'll probably be in those niche builds rather than like a staple, but
I think something like Call of Brine and Overcharge uh, could also still see play with killers like Trapper and Hag, where they are more. Um, Not only can they play in a 3-gen style where they just physically patrol the area with their character, but they can also set up to defend the area stronger. So you can really deter survivors from going to those gens and give more time for the Call of Brine and Overcharge regression to take effect, possibly.
yeah, and with like Hag, you'd have to kind of like weave through, right? You're able to wipe away the traps. So you have to like slowly get through that web or crouch through them if you opt to do that. So that like allows the gen to regress a little bit longer before you actually get to it. So yeah, I think there's some killers who could still use it, but it's not gonna be like a go to. This is clearly the strongest, most difficult build to go against. I think Pop Pain Res is like you said, is like somewhat interesting. Like Pain Res is still really good, although I feel like in a way, Pain Res cutting off the 25% and then trying to pop the same gen afterward. If you did that, it's like Pain, because since pop is based off of the amount of current progress, Pain Res is almost like reducing the amount that pop could. Like obviously, it's still a
Yeah,
strong combo and getting rid of a large chunk combined, but I don't
yeah,
know.
but
I don't
I
like
don't think that the strength of that is to pop the same gen that got pain resed. I think it lets you
possibly.
split the pressure of your
That's
gen
probably a better
regression.
way to do that. Yeah, I've seen. It feels like at least the people who have been running it that I've gone against have generally been like kicking someone off a gen and then going and popping the same gen a lot of the time. But yeah, I would
I
agree.
think
I
that's
don't think
just
that.
wrong.
Yeah, I don't think that that's like the best way to do it. You have to kind of like spread them out to get the maximum. But then obviously, right, if there's not, like you said, at least with like pain res, you can control, like if you are pretty confident that there's not a generator worth regressing, you can hold off on
Hmm.
spending the charge. Pop doesn't really have that, so you have to spend it
Right.
somewhere. And kicking a generator with less than a quarter percent is going to do almost nothing. So yeah, I don't, yeah, I don't know how I feel. I know you were saying with Otz's video, like it's possible that's probably going to be like the first route that people try and explore a little bit, but I'm not sure that that's going to end up sticking. I agree with like Deadlock, and I think with like Trapper and Hag and killers that need setup, I think Corrupt will still exist and be there. I've seen a lot of No Way Out, and like that was also like a perk that I feel like was always just kind of hanging around, but I think now with 3 gens not being as easy to control, you just buy yourself like an extra gen's worth of time almost when the last gen is completed. If you're able to spread out the hooks and gain your 4 tokens, like I feel like those more consistent rather than like worrying about the gens, just like find ways to get chunks of like extra time back to buy yourself more time and then maybe more emphasize like getting more downs and stuff like that.
I'm trying to think. The perk Nowhere to Hide just jumped out at me, and everybody knows that there's synergy between Nowhere to Hide with Call of Brine and Eruption and whatnot. Um, I'm I'm trying to think if there's like a particular killer who would benefit from, really wants Nowhere to Hide and then would therefore be more incentivized to run the gen kick slowdown perks. Nothing's really jumping out to me. Like my first thought was like Nurse, because she can then blink around to try and get more value out of the moving sphere of aura reading with her, but
Blight
I
kind
don't
of
know.
too with the speed a little bit.
Yeah.
Like if you just like kick and then immediately dash. But yeah, I feel like that's a good point. I think Nowhere to Hide might be a casualty in like it wasn't nerfed, but the stuff that it synergizes with was nerfed. So now it's almost like, right, it's kind of like Lethal Pursuer, where Lethal is really strong, but a big reason why it finds itself in a lot of builds is to synergize and extend and buff essentially other perks.
Mhm.
Nowhere to Hide was really convenient because it already meshed really well with the other meta perks. Now it doesn't necessarily fit as well, so maybe you just like see it a lot less just because it doesn't, just because Call of Brine and Overcharge aren't getting rid as much. So
And
I
honestly, Nowhere to Hide is a really premier source of information.
yeah,
So,
even on its own, yeah, I think is really good.
yeah, I mean, having these perks kind of, you know, nowhere to hide. Catching a stray from these is kind of
Yeah.
a kind of a bummer.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that that pretty much wraps up the killer side, and kind of switching more to the survivor end, right? The big ones, which were probably the biggest two killer side complaints, were related to Dead Hard and Circle of Healing, which is the boon. So Dead Hard being limited to, you basically gain the charge of Dead Hard upon getting off of a hook, which means that you maximum per game can use 2 Dead Hards. It still puts you in exhaustion, but you only expend the charge if you pull off a successful Dead Hard. So if the killer doesn't hit your Dead Hard and you manage to get away and the exhaustion goes away, you would keep it. But obviously, if you go down and get hooked, you'd have it anyway. Circle of Healing got changed where you can't heal inside, you can't self heal inside the boon now. That's not like a buff that it grants, but in exchange, it buffed the healing speed to 100%, where it previously was 50. And it also now shows the auras of injured survivors that are within the boon's range to teammates from any range across the map, as long as the injured person is inside the boon. So if you want to kind of tackle either or both and give what your thoughts are.
So I don't really have anything to say about Dead Hard. Like I don't run I didn't run Dead Hard a ton prior to this change, and I haven't run it at all after, because as I have said many times before, it's not called Balanced Landing. Circle of Healing, I will say, I have a lot to say about this one, actually. So, very early on, we realized that the new Circle of Healing meta is to load in with randos. They get hit, they run to the boon, and then start teabagging, hoping somebody will come and heal them, and not being productive at all until that happens. That's really funny. It's gonna get really annoying if that continues.
Yeah.
And then also, we had a group of us run a collective group of perks where we basically could pick a person up before the killer could down them again, or like could pick them up. So like one of us was running Circle of Healing, and then the rest were running Botany, Desperate Measures, We're Gonna Live Forever, and Medal of Man to like take protection hits. And we were doing the thing that we like to do a lot of the time, where we just screw around and not do generators. But we were just sitting there taking protection hits, taking Medal of Man hits, picking people up before the killer could pick them up themselves, and it was just ridiculous. And that requires a lot of setup, and it doesn't progress the game any, so I don't think that it's anything to like be concerned with. But it is funny that that's something we can do.
Yeah, it is. It was very entertaining, and like even in a more practical sense, right? Like the healing buff is like really strong for resetting as like a team. Plus like the info, I think, will help solo queue players in like understanding positioning and like where they might need to go to help progress the game. I agree, it might get old pretty fast, seeing Survivor just kind of linger in there waiting for a heal. But double healing and stuff is now 4 seconds, just with, as long as the group of 3 is standing inside of Circle of Healing. So yes,
yeah, it makes like full team resets like really, really fast.
Yeah, and I think that like while it's still strong, I think it's clearly a healthier version of the perk than it used to be. And it also doesn't like synergize with medkits, which is really nice. Like they addressed a lot of those issues. But I do still think that the perk is like really good. Like I think you're still gonna see it a lot. And like the buff going from 50 to 100, where they were initially going to keep it at 50 on the PTB, like that's a big difference. I wouldn't be surprised if there's enough complaints that they tone it down again, but at least for now, I do think that it's still pretty strong, and arguably probably still the strongest boon of the 4. So I think it's quite good, and I'm glad that it wasn't just nerfed into oblivion. Dead Hard, yeah, real quick, like I was running it a little bit still with like my metal build and trying to like tank additional hits, and like yeah, it kind of gets hit still, like people swing at it because they're not expecting it, but also like you're capped on like how much value you can get. And I found myself when I was playing killer running into it a bit more, but also like I'm hitting people's dead hards more frequently than I was, like a higher percentage, but I'm not seeing the dead hards like nearly as frequently, so I'm able to like go for lunges or go for like ranged killer powers and never have to like worry about waiting it out. So like there's a big trade-off there where like, yeah, I might hit a few more people's dead hards than I used to having to wait it out, but now I never have to wait it out. So all of that time lost from waiting out every like a dead hard on basically every survivor no longer exists. So uh yeah, I think people are gonna try and stick it out with dead hard, but I do think a lot of people are just gonna move on pretty quickly and just move to sprint, lithe, balance landing in particular. Like those three I think will probably be it. I don't see like smash. Like I think we joked about like smash hit not really being a real perk, and head on's kind of
Yeah.
its own thing anyway, even though it's exhaustion. But
There's overcome also,
and
which
overcome,
I think
yeah,
is fine.
yeah, it's okay. And then kind of just segueing into just healing and medkits as a whole, right? Like medkits were pretty obliterated compared to their previous version. I don't think they're useless by any means, but it now takes of each of them have 24 charges base, but they now use all 24 charges if you heal yourself. Gives you basically a heal and a half of trying to heal teammates a little bit faster, but it doesn't synergize with circle of healing, so it's kind of limited on just how much faster you can heal teammates. I don't know if you want to give your thoughts on running medkits and how that's felt.
Prior to this patch, I ran medkits pretty often. They were incredibly busted, and I knew it.
Yeah,
um, After this change, I'm still running them, but there's really they feel I don't know, they still feel fine. They definitely you notice how much longer they take. Uh, but I think the more important thing is that you can at most get 2 heals if you run the gel dressings and either of the other two, the tape or um,
the gauze roll, I
the
think, right?
yeah the two extra add-ons for charges, or you can stack for heal speed. But the most you can get for heal speed is 25% with the abdominal dressing and the medical scissors, which is like half of the bonus speed that you used to get from green medkits. So it's far from oppressive as far as the healing speed goes. It is very noticeable when you're using the medkit that it's taking longer than it used to, but it's still strong. I don't really I very rarely found myself in a position where I needed to heal more than like twice with a medkit in a game anyway. Um, there were times where I would run like a purple medkit with like extra charges just so that I could play very aggressively and go and take hits and then run off and heal or whatever. But like for most general gameplays, like medkits still seem perfectly fine. I think that I didn't really have problems with my killer playstyle going against medkits, but that's certainly not like that hasn't changed. Like making medkits worse doesn't make it any more difficult to go against them. And on the survivor side, they still seem perfectly powerful even if they are weaker.
Yeah, and I think yeah, like I feel like when I'm going against killers now, they seem more content with doing like hit and run and just trying to spread out pressure, especially with sloppy. We've seen like a lot of wraiths try and do that a lot more, knowing that like even if they've got med kits, it's not going to be what it was where they can relieve a heal, you know, in 12 seconds, if not faster. But it feels it feels okay. I am a little bit concerned just for like the solo queue experience, right? Where like solo queue is where it felt more balanced because like finding team heals is a lot more difficult. But then on the other side, like good coordinated, like with comms and really like experienced players, it becomes really oppressive and playing hit and run becomes like a no-go a lot of the time. So I do think that this was like the correct change. I still do think that there's going to be players that are just like turned away from continuing to play Survivor because they lean so heavily on using them in like solo queue situations. So we'll see what that does to like player based stuff moving forward. But I, as far as like just from a strictly balanced perspective, I think that like it was the right decision. And I, the syringes and styptics and stuff both were toned down. Still can be pretty game changing and stuff if used correctly. But I do think that they did a good job. And then the one like weird side effect that we were running into because we were trying to do the new tome and trying to spread out what people can use can try to break totems. So I was like, oh, I'll switch off of using inner healing and try to run pharmacy. That'll be my method of self healing. And holy shit, that is a massive difference. Green med kits are not even close to the same. It's like a huge like between combined looting the chest and then grabbing the med kit and then actually healing, like it's like a 32-second commitment to heal, and that's not even including running and finding a chest in the first place. And pharmacy doesn't even show you the auras of chests like Plunderers does. So outside of the guaranteed spawn in basement, it can be really hard to find it. So like that perk, like you said with nowhere to hide, like randomly sort of
catching a stray.
Caught a stray, just like pharmacy sucks even more now. Like it went from like a weird perk that allowed you to find a self heal, and like now
it's like a fun niche perk, and now it's dog shit.
It's really it felt horrible. Like the like 2 games I ran, I'm like, I guess that's not an option for me anymore. I guess I'm just sticking with inner or something else. It was terrible. Like if you're gonna try and use pharmacy to heal, I feel like you're better off committing like half your build to just do like self-care botany, and just that way you can do it wherever. Like it's a more efficient way to do it. I don't know how they managed to make pharmacy worse than that, but they definitely did. And then,
it was a bazooka of a stray.
Yeah, it's just like it was not a thing that I anticipated. Like I just didn't expect. Pharmacy was not on my radar of perks to get like nerfed as part of the changes, and it really was. I just didn't even think about it. And then kind of just talking about like any bugs and stuff that we've run into. The big ones that we encountered in, we've only had the new build for a couple days now when recording, but the big ones that have jumped out is plague for some reason. Previously, if you were not infected and you unhooked another survivor, the only way that you would become infected is if that player on the hook was fully infected and was broken ahead of time. Now, if they're infected at all and you unhook them, you instantly become infected as well, which is not how it's supposed to work. It's never worked like that, but gives her way more pressure, right? Like the most common scenario that you would encounter is they're using the corrupt purge, right? Using the red puke instead, get the downs, put that person on the hook, and then it expires, and that way they switch, use the vile purge, and infect them. It has just the one tick on the meter, but when they come off the hook, they'll start gradually getting infected. So that way you're kind of applying pressure for the future, so to speak. But now it's if someone goes and unhooks them, that little tick is now applied to both survivors, which is like a game breakingly like huge boost to plague strength. Like it strictly doubles how many survivors get infected. It's like a pretty massive thing. And then the other thing is just, I don't really know what's happening, but randomly adrenaline is just not giving you the health state. I had it once where I had just finished a deep wound a couple seconds after the last gen pops, didn't get adrenaline, and then also had a situation where I was on a hook, got adrenaline to proc because the last gen was finished while I was on the hook, and then came off and wasn't healed. Even though that is still happening in other matches, it just feels very random where it just sometimes doesn't give you the proc. I don't know why, but those were like kind of the 2 big things that have jumped out so far.
Yeah, so with plague, it's weird. I'm wondering how this changes the calculus of if you're supposed to cleanse earlier versus later, because if you're getting more people infected, then it becomes easier to over cleanse, where you use up all of the fountains, and then they all reset and the plague gets her power. I don't know if that's the correct play, but it's an interesting thing to think about, because generally the agreed upon way to play against plague is to just stay infected until the last generator is done, and then people can cleanse, because at that point it's just like 20 seconds to open the gate and people are out. So being healthy to make sure that you can get out the gate is the play. But with this bug that's going on, I think it's still probably correct to stay infected until the end game, but I don't know. I haven't really considered that until just now. Uh, it's crazy how seemingly these bugs will pop up that are not being affected by any updates. It's crazy how they're able to do this with their spaghetti code. With adrenaline, yeah, like sometimes adrenaline is giving the health state, sometimes it isn't. It's very inconsistent, and I can't see any rhyme or reason to it. It's bizarre.
Yeah, because like I said, it's giving it in like the same situation will occur, and one of them I get the heal and the other I don't, and there doesn't seem to be any like difference in the two situations on what would explain why it's not happening. And even still, it should be happening regardless. So it's like regardless of whether we can pinpoint the bug or not, it's still not working correctly.
Right.
And yeah, the plague thing is interesting. Like trying to figure out how you game plan against it. Like, but when you just mentioned it, I'm like thinking like maybe it is better to stay infected because it's easier to get infected now because of the way that the hook mechanic is working. So I guess then there's like, well, if you're going in, yeah, it's just like it makes more people infected, which makes it easier to camp for her, because the idea is like if she's just camping and everyone else is infected and you have to go in and save, you have to cleanse ahead of time. But now more people are infected, so she has to do less and get less pressure to make that like a viable strategy, and therefore like more cleansing has to happen if you want to get people off hook. So it really does like change a lot of the equation on how you try and deal with her and how she tries to like maximize her power and just keep survivors infected or get downs quickly. So yeah,
I don't understand how this is a consistent issue where part A of the game will get changed and part B will break. I don't get
yeah,
it.
just like completely unrelated. But
Yeah.
yeah, those were what we've spotted so far, and I'm sure there's more that we haven't encountered because it's only been a short amount of time. But is there any other thoughts that you wanted to? Oh, and actually, I had just thought of something was sort of related to bugs. Was Merciless appears to actually have been addressed.
Woo!
Merciless Storm no longer just randomly like puts your gen back to 0 if you missed the skill check during it. So even though they didn't kill switch it for like a month when it was doing that, apparently we got there. So that's good. It doesn't. Didn't run into any more Merciless Storms. Pretty much. That frequency has gone way down now that it seems like it's addressed. So
I ran into one
yeah, I think I
not
like had
too long
one.
ago. Yeah, like last night I think, or the night before. But yeah, it's used way less, which is fine. Like when the perk is working as intended, the perk is fine. I have no issue with it. But yeah, it was really miserable to play against when it was broken. One thing I will say, and I tweeted about this to the devs, there are some killers and some skins of killers that just aren't playing audio when the killer does a basic attack. Uh, so be mindful of that. If you're playing as survivor, you may be getting swung at. Don't rely exclusively on audio cues when 99ing your sprint burst or when dead harding or dropping off for balance or something like that. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. That pretty much like wraps it up for the mid chapter specific portion. Pretty good patch despite the couple of bugs. I feel like I've seen most people's assessment has been both. There's people on both sides who are unhappy, so that probably means it's pretty good. We'll see how it plays out as people kind of explore the patch more and try and change it up. I think that it does hopefully create a more diverse meta. We'll see how everything sort of translates in the long run.
I simultaneously think that this patch is extremely survivor sided and extremely killers sided. Jeez, that was difficult to say.
But yeah, so we're gonna kind of cycle back into what we've been trying to do the last couple of weeks of doing like a build spotlight where we each talk about a build that we like to run. and Scrap, you can start and talk about your killer build.
Yeah, so this build is for Doctor. Doctor was, I think, the second killer that I put like a decent amount of time into. The first being Wraith, like I mentioned a couple weeks ago. But Doctor I thought was like pretty fun. Like his add-ons give a lot of variability to his gameplay. Being able to shut down loops, I thought was really fun. Um, Eventually, I stopped maining Doctor because I was getting really frustrated at like latency issues. But you know, I still play him every now and then, and this is a build that I've run for a long time and one that I think is pretty good. So it runs Save the Best for Last, uh, Deadman Switch, and Pain Resonance, and then the spice is Whispers.
Yep. So Whispers has been a favorite perk of mine for sure. Why does Whispers fit into this build in particular, and how does it work with Doctor?
So Whispers is a perk that goes on or off if any survivor in any state in any location is within 32 meters of you. Doctor also has a 32-meter terror radius, like at base. So if Whispers is on, then you know that if you static blast, that you'll either be guaranteed to hit somebody, or that somebody is within 32 meters of you and is in a locker or on the ground. Now, it has come up several times for me when playing Doctor, where I'll use the static blast when Whispers is on and maybe there's only one survivor left or two survivors left and they're trying to stealth. And I'll be like, okay, well, they're here, but they're in a locker, and I go and grab them immediately. And it's extremely strong. The fact that Whispers is the exact terror radius of the Doctor and the exact terror radius or the exact distance as the static blast is like a really clean way of getting additional information and guaranteeing that you're able to get the value of increasing madness on the survivors with your static blast.
Yeah, it kind of gives you like a guaranteed hit, or if it doesn't hit someone, then like you said, you just like know that they're in a locker, or I guess running Calm Spirit if they decide to do that.
Well, even with
But
Calm Spirit,
but you
then
at
you
least
can see
know.
the madness on the side.
That's true, yeah. So you at least
Yeah.
know that you hit someone, even if it doesn't do the specific location. Pain Res Deadman's, that was kind of like an old combo from like a year ago. How did you kind of settle upon that combination to still run, I guess?
I mean, as I was saying before, I still think that Pain Res is a pretty premier regression tool. Uh, if you get full value from it every game, then you're basically forcing the survivors to do a sixth generator. Although it can be spread out and whatnot, but like for the most part, that's what it is. Uh, and then with Deadman's, you have the obvious synergy of, if the survivor is holding on to the generator when the pain res happens, then they scream and let go and it blocks the generator. But also if you just, static blast them or use your shock therapy, you can get them off of generators and get additional Deadman switch value. Uh, Doctor, I think, is pretty unique in how many ways he can utilize Deadman switch value, um, because all of the ways of making the survivors scream kicks them off of the gen and blocks it for that same period of time.
And I guess with save, right? This is the last perk. How does save fit onto an M1 killer, right? That doesn't have a way to kind of get around losing stacks when you hit your obsession, right? Like a lot of killers, like Demogorgon, right? When you were talking about, has shred, and Nemesis has his whip. Deathslinger can kind of like break the chain. Range killers and stuff, like a lot of them have other ways. So how does that kind of fit onto Doctor?
Yeah, so there isn't a good way of avoiding um, losing the stacks if you hit your obsession. However, the upside of having a high number of stacks on non-obsession targets is ridiculously high. So with Doctor at max stacks, you can use your shock therapy on somebody like at a window to vault, make them unable to vault, smack them, do your wipe animation, and smack them again before they're able to get through the vault. Your upside in lethality is just incredibly high. You do have the downside of either having to sacrifice your stacks or ignore your obsession for the most part. But the upside is massive. It's such a good feeling to lock somebody at a pallet or at a window, smack, you're down, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, basically just like chainsawing them essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
After you shock them, and then like what add-ons sort of fit into this build? I know you were talking about his add-ons, and he has like a very wide array of different kinds of add-ons and different effects. Doctor are a little bit notorious for having a bit of a novel attached to each of the add-ons sometimes, but
Yeah,
which
for
ones
sure.
kind of stand out?
So the pretty much regardless of any build that I run, there's two add-ons that I never put on, and those are the two add-ons that change the shock therapy, either making it a long line or circle, or a ring, I guess. They are pretty bad in my opinion. That's not a hot take. Um, Pretty much everything else is on the table for doctor builds in general. But one thing that you really want to stay away from with this build is running any calm add-ons. The synergy of knowing that you're going to get the shock from your static blast because of whispers is huge. Like I said, the fact that the whispers range, the tear radius range, and the static blast range is all the same. If you change anything with monitor or with the calm add-ons, that can really throw off your calculus of if you're guaranteed to get somebody or you may get somebody and they're out of range, and uh, it really throws a lot of stuff off. I really like anything that can reduce the time to affect somebody with the shock therapy. So the discipline add-ons, they're very good. The extra range for your shock therapy is very strong. And the iridescent king and queen are fine too, just to spread madness faster from the queen and to get all of the passive buffs from the king. But um, really, my go-to is the purple discipline and the green range add-on, uh, just to make your shock therapy stronger, be able to get people off of gens quicker for your dead mans, lock people down at loops, stuff like that. Really lean into his anti-loop power.
All right, nice. Yeah, that kind of I guess moves into my survivor build. This is actually like a weird build that I kind of stumbled upon by accident only a couple weeks ago when we were kind of just running random perks, just doing like a perk roulette, and I got 3 out of these 4, and then added the 4th myself, which was for the people, resilience, sprint burst, and inner healing, which was the one that I added. So yeah, so it's basically just those 4, and it's a really fun build for the people's, like one of those perks that's it's kind of like head on or flashbang for me, like one of those perks that's just like fun to use because it's so chaotic a little bit, but
Yeah, and it's
yeah,
such a hype play. You know,
yeah,
you can get so many highlight reel moments with for the
mhm,
people.
yeah,
So,
definitely.
why did you choose for specifically sprint burst for this build for your exhaustion?
Yeah, I felt like, so like I said, I kind of random into it, but sprint felt really good, right? So it's one of those where sometimes 99ing your sprint burst I think is like essential for this build. So being able to keep sprint burst so that way you can get to a survivor that needs to be hit with the for the people, or to run up, do the for the people, and have the sprint burst ready to get away yourself, I think is also really important. So you're not just like kind of trading for no reason. I think both ways can be really important. Whether the killer, like if they leave them slugged, then you can sprint toward them. But otherwise, you might need to save it to get away. And then obviously, if you're using for the people, you might be spending more of the game injured. So sprint burst is probably the best way to keep yourself protected and still be able to sit on gens in dead zones and stuff like that.
Yeah. Go over some of the perk synergies between like for the people and then resilience and inner, and how you're playing around with, purposefully being injured and purposefully healing yourself, and how all that goes.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that kind of jumped out immediately right when I kind of rolled into the build was just like, you for the people someone else, and now your resilience is just active. You have no say in the matter. You have the resilience buff, which is great for sitting on gens, continuing to be chased. Right, if you're jumping into the fray to for the people someone, the killer might just target switch and go for you. So having the resilience vault speed is really nice. And then obviously inner, I think is it just felt like it fit really well. It's like a good way to consistently self heal. Especially now with some of the medkit changes, I think that's something that you could tack onto the build, but inner gives you a way to kind of prep ahead of time and have more consistent, more number of uses throughout the duration of the match. So yeah, like kind of all of that works really nicely. And I think also not just saving teammates in a situation where they're down, but also a lot of times I'll just kind of use for the people on a teammate that, there's plenty of situations that come up where I go for the unhook, I'm healthy, that person was getting tunneled, they're on death hook, I haven't, no one else in the match has been hooked, I can just put them at full health, and sure, the killer might continue to tunnel them, but it at least gives them 2 health states to play with and causes the killer to waste a lot more time. And like I said, resilience gives me that speed buff. If all I can do is go and sit on a gen, it lets me get through the gen faster while they're looping the killer, and maybe someone else can try and take a protection hit after or something like that. But being able to just transfer the health state gives you a lot of flexibility on like situations where it might be useful.
Yeah. Anything extra to like kind of look out for with this build? Anything that may not be immediately obvious that people that want to run this build should know about?
Yeah, so for the big thing that jumps out is for inner, where I've encountered this, is that inner does not, like, if you break a totem, the perk won't activate and light up if you're already broken. So you have to break the totem before you're in the broken or after the broken expires. So if you want to break a totem before you use the for the people, that works. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait for the broken status to expire. Then you can go find a totem. The resilience lets you break the totem faster. So I think that's like a perfectly viable solution, but you don't want to for the people and then go break a totem while you're broken. So that way you're like prepping it for when the broken expires, because it just won't activate and you'll just have broken. You can break the totem if you want to prevent Noed or something, but it's not gonna fuel your inner at all. So that's like, I think, the big pitfall to look out for. It's really tempting to be like, oh well, I have to wait for my broken to expire anyway. Good time to go find a totem, but you have to do it before or after.
Okay, cool.
So
Thanks for sharing that. That's cool.
yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Like I said, it's just like a chaotic perk, and yes, definitely gets the fun clip moments. It's for sure.
Yeah, we've had some very memorable for the people moments through our time playing the game.
Yeah, it's just like random situations where the killer like gets the down kick, and then while they're kicking the pallet, you just like run up and for the people while they're in the kick animation, and both just run away. Like it's not a very common perk, so I don't think like killers are generally expecting or know how to like try to bait it out. It's not like a flashlight save where they might expect it. It's just kind of out of nowhere, and
Yeah, so
it's
this
instant.
this does seem like a build that can be viable in solo queue because you can just run up and heal the person. They don't need to know that you're doing it. However, if they're not ready for it to happen, then they may immediately go down. If they go down and then as the killer is breaking the pallet, you run up and for the people, then their hands are off the keyboard, they're getting their water, they just immediately go down
Yeah,
again.
I did actually have earlier today a pretty a random match where I was solo queue where I was able to for the people survivor that was slugged. They were going to chase. There was only 3 of us alive. They were going to chase the other injured person. I run up for the people. We jump on the last gen that was at like 3/4 that he had just chased them off of. We get it, and then both of the other people proc their adrenaline, which was just like, okay, I guess that's a good scenario. That's definitely a good turn of events. So it's just like there's good things that can happen from just being like altruistic like that, and there's going to be
Did they
plenty of
gain the health
times.
states off of their
They
adrenaline?
did actually that game. Yeah, crazy. It wasn't bugged that time, which was good. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be situations where you try to for the people and it can go wrong, and obviously, like messing around with health states and taking yourself from healthy to injured certainly puts you at risk. I wouldn't like go for that, or be. You should definitely be more conservative in how you do that if you're on like death hook and stuff. But especially when you haven't been hooked and other teammates and stuff are being threatened to be taken out of the game. I think it's certainly like a really good way to preserve and keep like the numbers intact, so you have the advantage.
Yeah, I will say, speaking about this in solo queue, like there are those moments where the person could be getting a drink of their water and just go down again, but it's not like Deliverance or I guess recently they added the icon for kinship, but for autodidact, these perks that really have meaningful impact on the game, but if you're in solo queue, your teammates have no idea about it. For this build, like it's pretty reasonable. You run up. It's not reliant on them to do anything at all. They're just picked up and then you both, go fuck off.
Yeah, and it's like it's one of those perks, kind of like Unbreakable, where you're probably gonna go. There's gonna be times where you go a few games and you don't really like see any value from it, just because maybe the moment doesn't present itself. But it definitely can like completely change the tide of games if you use it in the right situation. And I think the other stuff fuels it and allows you to kind of use it multiple times per match, especially for slug heavy killers, right? Like you're going against twins is a perfect example of a killer where it really counters them pretty heavily. So
And there are also situations where, somebody may be slugged, but they're on death hook. You can pick them up off the ground for the people them back to healthy, and then you'll be injured, but they're not immediately at risk of
mhm.
getting out of the game. So it isn't just for getting somebody off of the ground. You can get them fully healthy after the fact.
Yeah, definitely. But
Cool.
that pretty much yeah, I think wraps it up for this week's episode. We'll be back next week. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video. All of that kind of stuff really helps, and you can find us when we post new content each week. You can find me at Z Subtle on Twitter, TikTok, and Twitch. Where can they find you, Scrap?
Yeah, Twitter ScrapBrain SE2 and Twitch ScrapBrain SE2. If you follow us, then I'll give Dragon Knight a high five.
Hype. Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Peace.